Being a frontier sheriff was a brutal, deadly, and short-lived endeavor, far removed from heroic shootouts or romanticized notions of taming the Wild West. Its essence revolved around surviving a profession that claimed most men within their inaugural year. The paramount concern wasn't its inherent peril, but rather whether one possessed the fortitude to endure it. The path to becoming a frontier sheriff didn't commence with an application, but rather with formidable survival skills, honed from a tender age. Boys in the West were proficient in handling firearms by 7 or 8, not for recreation, but for defense and sustenance. Their formative years involved rigorous target practice, mastering horsemanship, and internalizing that hesitation was a prelude to death. By the age of 12, one could either dispatch a rattlesnake from 20 paces or risk succumbing to its venom. There were no police academies, formal training regimens, or prerequisite qualifications. Most individuals assumed the sheriff's mantle simply because no one else dared to. Frontier towns conducted elections where victory bestowed a tin badge and a near-certain death sentence. Campaigns entailed persuading boisterous miners in saloons that you were formidable enough to apprehend them later. Some sheriffs were reformed outlaws themselves, with towns reasoning that if they had survived years of criminality, they might succeed in curbing it. This twisted yet effective logic suggested that a former horse thief would be adept at apprehending similar offenders. A notable Arizona sheriff, previously a cattle rustler, transitioned to law enforcement, utilizing his intimate knowledge of every trick, many of which he had devised. Age was inconsequential, and experience was often optional. The sole indispensable qualification was an unwavering willingness to confront gunfire while others retreated. One Kansas town elected a 19-year-old sheriff solely due to his being the sole applicant. His career tragically concluded after 3 weeks, terminated by a bullet. Training comprised whatever the previous sheriff imparted before succumbing, resigning, or absconding in the dead of night. Occasionally, this offered invaluable insights into character assessment and ambush avoidance. Other times, it merely consisted of admonitions like, "Don't stand in front of windows," and "Sleep with your boots on." If the preceding sheriff met a common demise, learning occurred through perilous trial and error, with a strong emphasis on the latter. The oath of office was succinct: uphold the law, safeguard citizens, and strive to avoid being murdered. Achieving 2 out of 3 was deemed a respectable outcome. The badge, typically tin or brass, was often affixed to the chest like a target. Some sheriffs concealed it within their coats to avoid advertising their role, while others proudly displayed it, though the proud ones met swifter ends. Resignation wasn't easily accomplished either. Some towns compelled sheriffs to sign contracts with financial penalties for breach, while others exerted social pressure, branding quitters as cowards. In frontier communities, where reputation was paramount, cowards seldom endured. Thus, one persevered, knowing each sunrise could be their last, for the alternative, being labeled a coward, was deemed worse than death. Upon accepting the badge, one swiftly realized that the position came with woefully inadequate equipment and utterly unrealistic expectations. A frontier sheriff's inventory was distressingly sparse: a badge, a firearm if fortunate, and a jail cell, likely incapable of containing a determined drunkard. Everything else had to be personally acquired, assuming one survived long enough to receive a paycheck. The revolver served as both primary instrument and steadfast companion. Most sheriffs wielded a Colt single-action army or a similar 6-shooter. These were not the rapid-fire weapons depicted in Hollywood, but rather cumbersome, inaccurate beyond 25 yards, and necessitated manual cocking between shots. Reloading consumed 30 to 45 seconds, an eternity when under fire. Ammunition was costly, with a box of 50 cartridges equating to a day's wages. Target practice was a luxury most sheriffs couldn't afford, with many lawmen discharging their weapons only a handful of times before engaging in actual gunfights. Imagine learning to drive by immediately entering a demolition derby. Such was frontier law enforcement. Some sheriffs carried shotguns for close-quarters engagements. A 12-gauge loaded with buckshot required minimal aiming, a considerable advantage when hands trembled and the target was intoxicated, enraged, and armed. The drawback was the shotgun's weight, slow reload time, and its tendency to imply an expectation of trouble, which was perpetually the case. Rifles remained in the office or on horseback. Winchester repeaters, with 15 rounds of .44-40 ammunition capable of felling a man at 200 yards, were popular. However, openly carrying a rifle in town suggested paranoia, though paranoid sheriffs generally outlived their trusting counterparts. The West rewarded suspicion and penalized an optimistic view of human nature. Handcuffs were uncommon and expensive, leading most sheriffs to employ rope or chains. Prisoners frequently escaped by a braiding rope against rocks, picking rudimentary locks, or simply waiting for the sheriff to doze off. One Arizona sheriff, having restrained a prisoner, later found him after 3 days, dehydrated but unbound, having rubbed the rope against a nearby boulder for an hour, and then vanished into the desert. The office typically doubled as the jail, and most frontier jails were architectural anachronisms. These were single rooms with iron bars, if one was lucky, reinforced sheds, if not. Some were merely ordinary structures with a locked door. Determined inmates could breach walls, tunnel beneath foundations, or await a moment of slumber to pilfer keys. Security systems were entirely reliant on the sheriff's perpetual vigilance. Modern communication was non-existent. Without radios, telephones, or means to summon assistance, troubles erupting on one end of town only reached the sheriff via messenger, by which time they had usually escalated or resolved themselves. Some sheriffs enlisted deputies, but this meant dividing an already meager salary. Most operated alone. Transportation relied on one's horse, if owned. A decent horse fetched $50 to $100, several months' wages for most lawmen. Without one, outlaws were pursued on foot, while they rode away mockingly. With one, the horse became a valuable target for theft. Either way, the sheriff faced a challenge. Horses also demanded feeding, shoeing, and care, adding further expenses to a barely remunerated profession. The sheriff's relationship with his equipment was straightforward. It was never adequate, never sufficiently reliable, powerful, or comprehensive for the job's demands. Yet it was all that was available, and one either made it function or failed entirely. Some sheriffs meticulously cared for their weapons, cleaning them daily and practicing draws in seclusion. Others treated them as mere tools, maintaining them just enough for functionality. Both groups succumbed at roughly the same rate. With the inadequate equipment secured, the true work commenced, often before most people awoke. A frontier sheriff's day commenced at dawn, assuming any sleep was achieved. Most didn't sleep much, as it implied vulnerability, and vulnerability risked a knife in the ribs or a permanent slumber. Astute sheriffs strategically napped in varied locations at irregular intervals, avoiding patterns that adversaries could exploit. Morning rounds initiated with inspecting the jail. Had prisoners escaped during the night? Were they still breathing? Both scenarios generated paperwork, though one considerably more. Following this, the sheriff patrolled the town, checking doors and windows, searching for signs of burglary or unrest, and subtly reaffirming the tenuous presence of law through his visible presence. Breakfast comprised whatever was affordable or what the local eatery provided gratis in exchange for protection. Some sheriffs enjoyed hearty meals of eggs and bacon, while others subsisted on coffee and hardtack biscuits capable of breaking teeth. The coffee was invariably atrocious, grounds boiled until it resembled mud and tasted worse. Yet it was consumed to maintain alertness and survival. Saloons opened around 10 a.m., marking the onset of the sheriff's primary duties. Drunken cowboys, gamblers, miners, and vagrants formed a volatile concoction of testosterone, alcohol, and loaded firearms. Brawls ignited over card games, women, perceived slights, or nothing at all. The sheriff's mission was to quell these disturbances before fatalities occurred, a task more formidable than it appeared. Intervening in conflicts meant entering a room replete with armed, inebriated men and persuading them to de-escalate through diplomacy or force. While diplomacy occasionally succeeded, other times it necessitated cracking skulls with a pistol grip and dragging unconscious troublemakers to jail by their boots. The demarcation between peacekeeping and assault was tenuous and frequently transgressed, with public concern limited solely to the restoration of order. Afternoons presented different, often more troubling issues than violence. Disputes over property lines, accusations of theft, domestic disturbances, and business disagreements all converged on the sheriff's desk. The sheriff served as law enforcement, judge, mediator, and therapist, all rolled into one fatigued individual. Lacking formal legal training, decisions were based on common sense, with the hope of avoiding retribution for misjudgments. Paperwork, surprisingly extensive for a frontier profession, included arrest reports, property records, incident logs, and court documents, all handwritten by candlelight with a constantly ink-dipping pen. Many sheriffs, barely literate, found this particularly arduous. Spelling was optional, and accuracy was an aspiration. As long as something was documented, the territorial government was satisfied. Patrols continued throughout the day, traversing the same dusty streets repeatedly, making one's face and presence known. The underlying theory was that visibility deterred crime. The reality was that it rendered one an accessible target for anyone harboring a grievance. Prudent sheriffs varied their routes and timings, unlike predictable ones who met their demise in ambushes in dark alleys, often in a state of confusion. Evenings were the most perilous period of any day, as saloons filled, tempers frayed, and weapons emerged over the slightest provocations. You consistently patrolled, entering various establishments, actively looking for trouble, and making your presence known. This visibility deterred some illegal activities. However, other offenses still occurred, prompting your response to gunshots, screams, or individuals frantically seeking your assistance with jumbled cries. Nightfall brought a unique dread, arguably worse than daytime violence, as darkness concealed threats everywhere. Each shadow could harbor an armed adversary. Traversing unlit thoroughfares meant exposing oneself to ambushes from any direction. Some sheriffs carried lanterns, thereby becoming apparent targets. Conversely, others moved covertly, hoping to detect threats before being observed themselves. Both approaches routinely led to fatalities. Sleep was a rarity, scheduled around prisoner checks, patrol rounds, and a pervasive paranoia. Most sheriffs slept in their offices, fully clothed, boots on, with their weapon readily accessible on the desk or beneath their pillow. Light sleepers survived. Heavy sleepers became cautionary tales recounted in saloons. One sheriff met his end, stabbed in his sleep by a prisoner's sibling who had picked the office lock. Following this incident, most lawmen opted to sleep upright in chairs. The routine was unyielding and ceaseless. Weekends, holidays, and sick days were non-existent. If your injuries rendered you unable to work, you were deemed unfit to retain your position. Towns did not compensate sheriffs for recuperation, they replaced them. The badge passed to the next volunteer, and you became another ex-lawman, attempting to subsist with your remaining skills and a body that no longer functioned properly. Some days were uneventful, which were, paradoxically, the most unsettling, as you understood that violence was merely postponed, not averted. The tranquility was ephemeral, and its rupture was swift and forceful. Experienced sheriffs could sense its impending arrival, a tension in the atmosphere, a shift in how people regarded you, a sudden absence of the usual troublemakers. Something was being orchestrated, and you were likely the intended target. Nevertheless, routine hazards were manageable compared to the repercussions when someone decided you should die. Hollywood gunfights are stylized ballets accompanied by dramatic scores. Actual frontier shootouts were chaotic, terrifying, and concluded in mere seconds. There were no suspenseful countdowns, no sense of honor, no fair play, just instantaneous violence and irreversible consequences that left corpses in the street. Most gunfights commenced without any forewarning whatsoever. Someone you had apprehended the previous month ambushed you from an alley. A drunken cowboy took offense at your gaze, interpreting it as disrespect. A gang rode into town specifically to eliminate you because you had killed their accomplice. The initial shot was fired before you realized you were in peril, and if it connected, your fate was sealed. Accuracy was notoriously poor, even among seasoned marksmen. Adrenaline surged through your system, your hands trembled, vision narrowed, and finely coordinated movements completely vanished. One documented shootout involved two individuals exchanging 17 shots from a distance of 15 feet, resulting in a total of 0 hits. They eventually conceded and departed, both unharmed and likely mortified. When bullets did strike, the results were devastating and instantaneous. A .45 caliber round created significant wound channels, shattered bones, and caused catastrophic hemorrhaging. Abdominal hits guaranteed prolonged, agonizing fatalities over days as your internal organs decomposed. Chest wounds led to suffocation in your own blood. Headshots were instantly lethal, but uncommon, as heads were small, mobile targets. Most men perished slowly, painfully, and fully cognizant of their impending demise. The famed quick draw was largely a fabrication and a cinematic invention. Actual gunfights favored the individual who fired first, not fastest. Sheriffs who survived learned to shoot from the hip, discharge through coat pockets, or draw while seeking cover. Style was irrelevant. Survival was paramount. Appearing composed while dying still constituted dying. Facing multiple adversaries was a common and often lethal scenario. Outlaws traveled in groups for security and intimidation. If you apprehended one, his companions would seek retribution. Suddenly, you confronted 3 or 4 armed men with only 6 shots and no assistance. The arithmetic was straightforward and brutal. Some sheriffs survived through sheer fortune or extraordinary capability. Most did not endure at all. Bystanders complicated every situation, leading to the deaths of innocent people. Frontier towns lacked any concept of a clear line of fire. Gunfights erupted in crowded saloons, bustling streets, and packed gambling establishments. Missed shots struck innocent individuals. Ricochets killed children playing nearby. One sheriff fired at an outlaw, missed, and fatally wounded a pregnant woman standing behind him. He resigned the following day and never again wore a badge. Cover was essential, but frequently inadequate. Wooden structures offered concealment, but not protection. Bullets easily penetrated walls. Stone or brick provided superior defense, but was rare in frontier towns constructed rapidly and inexpensively. Many sheriffs died seeking refuge behind materials that appeared robust, but were not. One sheriff crouched behind a water barrel during a shootout. Bullets pierced the water, the barrel, and him. Reloading during an exchange of gunfire was virtually impossible and typically deadly. 6 shots, then you were fumbling with cartridges while under fire. Some sheriffs carried 2 revolvers to double their capacity. Others utilized speed loaders, metal strips holding 6 rounds. Most simply perished before reloading became necessary, thereby resolving the issue permanently. The psychological ramifications were seldom discussed, but universally experienced by survivors. Taking a life, even in self-defense, left indelible scars. Some sheriffs succumbed to alcoholism, drinking to obliterate memories of faces and screams. Others developed what is now recognized as PTSD, nightmares, heightened vigilance, emotional numbness, violent outbursts. Counseling was non-existent. You either confronted it alone, or you didn't confront it at all. Wounded sheriffs encountered another nightmare, often more dreadful than the gunfight itself: frontier medicine. Being shot was detrimental. Being treated for it was often worse. Frontier medicine combined genuine ignorance with treatments so perilous they frequently completed what bullets initiated. The primary obstacle was locating a physician, which was not guaranteed. Many frontier towns had none whatsoever. The nearest medical professional might be 50 miles away, accessible only by an excruciating horseback journey that could span hours or days. Some sheriffs bled to death before reaching aid. Others succumbed to shock during the arduous ride, jostling on horseback with bullets still embedded in them. When doctors were available, their training varied widely, from legitimate to ludicrous. Some possessed genuine medical degrees from Eastern universities. Others had perused a book once and concluded that qualified them to perform surgery. One renowned frontier physician confessed he had been a veterinarian before treating humans, reasoning that the principles were sufficiently analogous. They were not, and his patients discovered this through harsh experience. Bullet extraction resembled medieval torture camouflaged as medicine. Anesthesia was limited to whiskey, which did not actually dull pain. It merely intoxicated you enough to lessen your awareness as someone probed inside you. Doctors explored wounds with unwashed fingers or metal instruments, feeling for bullets. Screaming was anticipated. Fainting was common. Infection was practically unavoidable. Sterilization was not a concept that most frontier doctors understood or practiced. Germ theory remained contentious in medical circles back east, and frontier doctors certainly did not subscribe to it. Instruments were wiped on soiled cloths between patients. Surgeons operated in street clothes, stained with the blood of previous patients. Wounds were packed with whatever was at hand: cloth, paper, sometimes tobacco. The tobacco was supposedly meant to prevent infection through some enigmatic property. It did not. It merely added tobacco to your infected wound. Amputation was the broadly applied solution to many problems. A shattered limb? Amputate. An infected wound? Amputate. A bullet lodged near bone? Amputate. The procedure involved a saw, some whiskey for the patient, and hope. Survival rates hovered around 50%. The other 50% perished from blood loss, shock, or subsequent infection that turned their stump gangrenous. Pain management was rudimentary and frequently created new complications. Laudanum, liquid opium, served as the primary painkiller. It was effective, but rapidly led to addiction. Many wounded sheriffs became reliant, exchanging one misfortune for another. Others refused it entirely, preferring excruciating pain to the haze of addiction. Both choices were dreadful in distinct ways. Recovery sites were limited to what you could afford, which was typically meager. Affluent sheriffs rented rooms in boarding houses. Impoverished ones recovered in their jail cells, lying on the same cots as their prisoners. Infection, fever, and delirium were anticipated aspects of healing. If you survived 2 weeks without succumbing to infection, you would likely recover permanently. Probably. Permanent disabilities were prevalent among surviving sheriffs. Shattered bones healed improperly, leaving limbs contorted. Nerve damage resulted in partial paralysis of arms or legs. Lung wounds caused chronic respiratory issues and persistent coughing. Many sheriffs returned to duty with considerable impairments, unable to afford retirement and too proud to resign. They worked until their disabilities, or someone else, ended their lives. The psychological impact of frontier medicine added another layer of trauma to an already traumatic profession. The knowledge that being shot meant probable death or permanent disability altered how sheriffs approached their duties. Some became more wary, avoiding confrontations when possible. Others grew reckless, reasoning that a swift death was preferable to a lingering one. Neither approach guaranteed survival. For those who endured wounds and treatment, another harsh reality awaited, one that somehow felt worse than physical pain. The compensation for the job barely justified the risks. Frontier sheriffs earned between $50 and $150 per month, depending on the size and prosperity of the town. That sounds plausible until you grasp the realities of its purchasing power and what it neglected to cover. A decent meal cost 50 cents, and room and board would set you back $20 to $30 each month. Ammunition, clothing, and gear were all out-of-pocket expenses for the sheriff. After managing these fundamental costs, most sheriffs found themselves with a leftover sum ranging from $10 to $20. This meager amount was the perceived value of their life, roughly 50 cents daily, less than an average person's lunch. Payment schedules were frequently erratic and, at times, entirely non-existent. While towns theoretically paid monthly, in practice, disbursements were often delayed or simply never materialized. Frontier economies were volatile. Mines closed, cattle drives ceased, and suddenly a town might not be able to afford its sheriff. Nonetheless, duty called, and you labored on, hoping payment would eventually arrive. Sometimes it did, but just as often, you accumulated worthless IORs. Supplemental income could be aggressive thanks to fee systems. Sheriffs earned additional money for tasks such as serving warrants, transporting detainees, and collecting taxes. These fees typically varied from $1 to $5 for each task. Enterprising sheriffs could potentially double their earnings through these commissions, whereas indolent ones faced destitution. This structure inadvertently promoted assertive law enforcement, occasionally leading to arrests based on dubious grounds, solely to secure the fee. Bounties presented another alluring but perilous income stream. Wanted criminals had rewards on their heads, from $50 to $500 for dangerous offenders, and sometimes even more for notorious ones. Capturing them offered extra money, provided you survived the attempt. Some sheriffs transformed into bounty hunters, chasing rewards across territories. Others preferred local duties, believing survival outweighed wealth and peril. Expenses consistently outstripped income in an endless cycle. Replacing a stolen horse consumed 3 months' salary. Medical treatment after a shootout cost another month's wages. New boots, ammunition, and equipment repairs quickly accumulated. Most sheriffs lived in perpetual debt, borrowing against future paychecks that might never arrive, given the risk of dying before payday. Retirement planning was essentially non-existent. There were no pensions, savings accounts, or safety nets. You toiled until your demise, dismissal, or incapacitation due to injury. Former sheriffs often ended up as night watchmen, saloon bouncers, or beggars on the very streets they once safeguarded. The fortunate ones had families to support them. The unfortunate perished alone and destitute in unmarked graves. The financial reality was stark and universally understood. You risked your life daily for remuneration that barely covered basic survival. Meanwhile, the very outlaws you pursued often possessed more wealth than you would ever accrue in a lifetime. A bitter irony not lost on anyone. Some sheriffs eventually switched allegiances, reasoning that if they were to be impoverished and hunted, they might as well be rich and hunted. Comparing sheriff's compensation to other professions highlighted the inherent absurdity of the job. Bartenders earned similar wages